All right. Hi, hello, and welcome back. At least for me, I was off last week. We still had another excellent stream from Mike running through his basically caverns of the caverns of the crystal flame, the quest for the frozen flame. I know what I'm saying. Um, but basically, we did not stream last week due to the election, but we are back here. And we are going to be, today, we're going to be talking about, it is the holiday season. And as such, and captions, awesome. And as such, basically, it's a time where a lot of us are traveling. We are visiting friends and family. Um, and a lot of times we're spending an extended period of time. And so basically one of the things you may want to do over those holidays is, hey, sometimes it'd be great basically just to run a fun one shot for those groups. And of course, whenever you're doing that, you're going to be maybe playing it for a group which may or may not have experience with playing games before. They may or may not be. Oh, hey, we've got YouTube comments showing up now in basically in the text box. Awesome, that's great. um, but we are basically because of that, basically you're going to be it's going to be basically one of those things where you're going to be looking for something that basically like D&D is an obvious one. Everyone's heard of D&D and it's quick and easy and things like that. But maybe you're wanting to play something with a group of people who basically you're wanting a game which isn't quite so combat heavy, or it's a little bit more fun and lighthearted, a little bit less kill and slaughter and maim and do all of that. Maybe you're looking for something, hey, I want something that's a little bit more relaxed, lighthearted, having fun, more problem solving through various means rather than basically just hack and slash your way through a dungeon. As such, basically, the ones that basically like things like I've run Tune in the past. For those kind of groups, I have run Feng Shui in the past. If any of those are interesting, you could check out our systems page. You can see I've got basically we have both of those on there. You can see me running and planning those games in Lore Link if you want to check those out. So that link right there, perfect. If basically as such, if you're kind of going for a, let's try to fit a little bit better in camera there. You can check out our Lore Link merch there. But in any case, you're looking for those type of games. And so basically this is another one that basically is going to be along those same lines. This is Discworld, Adventures in Ankh-Morpork. It is basically currently it is a Quickstart. Basically, it's a Quickstart guide available for free on Modiphius's website. It is available as a Kickstarter as well. It's a Kickstarter, I believe, just it's in the fun, wonderful world that we're in. The Kickstarter is technically closed, but is open for basically late backing, which means it's not really closed. It's just no longer they're no longer paying attention to the numbers for stretch goals or for funding and backing and things like that. So basically, take that as you will. That is currently available. It is available on the Modiphius site. The Quickstart guide is available for free. Eventually, the full campaign and adventure obviously will be also available through Modiphius as well. This is different than other Modiphius games we've looked at. We've looked at like Star Trek and Dune. Basically, are using their 2D20 system. Those are a little bit heavier systems. Where the Discworld system is very much kind of, it feels like it is intended for what the, kind of how we are using it here in basically this. It is much basically meant to be much more of a light game and grab a bunch of people and throw them at a table and sit down and talk with them and play a game with them. So basically, I'm going to talk a little bit about the system first, and we'll get more into lore link and things like that, and we'll pick up more with it next week as I get more into planning the Quickstart itself. But basically, just a quick overview, basically talking about the Discworld as a whole. If you're not familiar with Discworld, it is a series. It's a series of novels written by the late Sir Terry Pratchett. British author. They basically probably started writing, I believe, in the 80s. They feel, given the covers which stick in my mind, they're definitely 80s all the way up through the 2000s. They are satirical fantasy books. Very much kind of an answer to basically a satire that came out of the big epic fantasy trend of the late 80s, basically post Lord of the Rings. Basically, you had all those big epic sweeping fantasy novels going around. You had basically things like basically Lord of the Rings, and then the follow through like the Shannara series as well was another big. The Dragonbone Tad Williams Dragonbone Chair. Basically, even the Dragonlance books and things like that. Big epic fantasy books, which were chock full of those fantasy tropes that we've all kind of grown up with. But basically, they were very much written initially as just a pure parody of those kind of, not parody, sorry, satire of that and the current state of things. They are most famously known for the fact that they're written in a satirical style where everything is very much, everything is basically poking fun at a lot of the fantasy tropes, but everybody in the world is taking it very seriously. Like, nobody views what's going on as basically a chance to mug at the camera or make comedy jokes or things like that. It's taken a little bit more straightforward than, say, the Xanth series by Peter Minsky, which is definitely a comedy series where puns are the way that the world works. And basically every so often they stop and stare at the camera, and it also doesn't have any of the other weird, creepy undertones that Xanth did. Don't reread. Basically, if you read Xanth as a kid, don't go back and reread Xanth. It does not hold up well. Oof. But in any case, basically, Discworld started off as those kind of books and those kind of novels, and from there he kind of basically was very successful because he had a very good handle on that balancing line between a good story and a satirical story and making it funny. Basically, pretty much Asimov as a whole. But don't revisit; it's fine. It's it's famous for its kind of author's editor's notes that are added on to anything where there'd be an asterisk and there'd be an explanation which would reinforce the absurdity of whatever was going on, like explaining, giving even more detail about how something. Yes, Xanth was Anthony. Basically, Incarnation of Immortality and Xanth were both pure Xanthony. But it started off as pretty much just pure satire, and from time he kind of Pratchett had a world that he was wanting to build and stories he was wanting to tell, and they ranged from the more purely satirical, like basically making fun of things like Conan and things like that, to basically ranging into more kind of family friendly, basically like children's story, young adult story. Basically he had a series of books about a young witch, basically growing up in the world and claiming her place and taking her place, basically in a world that didn't seem quite to want her the way that she was. And the oppression, the dealing of interactions of government and the police and the poor, with his Night Watch series. And basically ended up being a really big and very famous, really working out really well to be a really interesting kind of world. And I will admit, it is because of the fact that it's a solid satirical world. When I first heard that someone was going to be doing a TTRPG based in Discworld, I was a little bit reticent. I was a little bit like, oh, you can't really do. Basically, it was like, okay, are they just going to make it? Either they're going to do it seriously, which you can't treat the Discworld as serious because it's full of just whatever. Basically, Pratchett wanted to parody at any given point, or you go ridiculously over the top, silly and wacky and things like that, and that doesn't really work for Discworld either. So basically reading through the book, and one of the first things I encountered when looking through the Quickstart guide, which can be seen. Whoop, no, not that. Wrong button. Can be seen here. Basically, see the credit page here. This is what basically that Quickstart guide, which that link just got posted in chat there. Thank you, 20, for working on that. But basically, it does very much clarifies that this is, while this is funny and things like that, everyone inside of it is taking it seriously, and it is very much satire. Where was it? It's good tone. Here we go in the tone section. You're not going to be moving 30 feet, dealing 12 damage to a monster. There are no rules for combat. Basically, focus on characters, the world, and the words. People are defined by traits, not numbers. The world of players can basically divide to control the story of narrative solutions. Finally, through everything, gently pushes. Finally, we encourage players to bend the English language as far beyond what would be considered reasonable. Terry Pratchett used words in ways that were unexpected and combinations of meanings that were playful, joyful, and often unreasonable. We heartily encourage you to do the same. The more puns, the better. It's also... basically, they've got a bit on safety tools. I thought they had something about the fact that this is satire, not comedy. Where was that? I have lost track of basically the point I was going to make. This is what you get when you basically don't memorize page numbers. Or maybe I just imagined it. Cool. Ugh. Gotta love that when you come back later and you're like, did I just make up something? Apparently it is something that my brain basically thought I saw, but it must have been on a different, maybe it's on the Kickstarter. But essentially it was the fact that this is basically, while this is funny and things like that, it is not meant to be absolutely just silly, ridiculous. It is meant to be satire rather than just being basically just kind of wacky hijinks throughout the entire time. It's just one of those things you're like, I could have sworn I've seen this, and now I can't find it. It's fine. It's fine. In any case, but basically the tone of the game itself is very much that. Basically, it's basically puns and twisting stuff and basically moving like that. And basically, it kind of, because of that, it fits better for a system that basically if you're wanting to basically pull something out. Basically over the holidays, basically at a party or something like that. If you're like, oh, we love we're gonna have a party, we're gonna have to we love to get together, do a group together. Could you throw something together for just a fun one shot for these people? And you're like, cool. Basically, and how this system works is the character sheets, like they were saying there. Basically, there are no numbers, they're traits and things like that. So character sheets are relatively straightforward to look at. They're just, you've got a name, you've got an organization that they belong to, a background, that character's niche, what that character's core is, what some of their quirks are, and like maybe some points. And that's it. That's the entire character sheet. Basically, the entire pre-generated character sheets are just that. So it is something very easy that you can have at a table, printed off. yeah, basically, it doesn't have a bunch of stats and numbers that someone who's going to look at and be like, oh, but I don't want to do math. I don't want to roll things and add numbers and search sheets for things and look for skills and things like that. This is much more of a game which is meant to be, hey, let's have some fun. And how much basically it's going to be, you're going to take these things and then you're going to use them. But rather, basically, you're going to use these skills. But basically, the nice thing about being Discworld is because of what you're encouraged to do because of the nature of the world that you're in. It is rather than being like, well, oh, basically, I've defined myself as basically like this one is better. It happen to me than you. Basically, obviously, that is meant to be, oh, okay, hey, this character is basically selfless and is going to basically going to basically kind of the tank type. They're going to be throwing themselves in front of other people. They're going to be taking the lead. They're going to be letting things happen to them so that they're kind of basically the heart and soul. But better it happened to me than you could also mean the fact that maybe basically you're trying to do something where a good effect is happening and you're vying for it with the villain. And you're like, better it happened to me than you. Can I get I'm gonna pick on that core because that works better. Basically, that doesn't say necessarily that it's a bad thing that it better happen to me than you. Maybe it's just a good thing also better happen to me than you. And playing around with things like that. Blend into the background is another trait that I've seen. And basically, obviously, you're gonna be like, oh, that's great for stealthing and sneaking. And maybe it's also good for they're trying to hide something in a picture. I'm good at blending into the background. I have a natural art skill because I'm good at blending into the background, and things like that. So it's basically rather than a more traditional kind of skill system where you're like everything is meant to be taken just as a basically to the letter of the law and the spirit of what it said there, and you have to tell somebody, no, that's not what that means. That's really signifying this or this. Basically, no, that basically, yes, you're right technically that's what that means, but that's not really what they intended. So let's dial it back and focus in on just actual thing and kind of stop people from having fun. This is meant to be twist it, take it, basically be silly, be ridiculous, basically twist it to its stretching point, so that you could hear it squeaking, as it were, as you bend it as far as you can to try to to make it work in whatever silly way you want, because that fits in with the system and you're encouraging people to do it. That also encourages people to interact with their character, study their character, know what those niches are, those cores and quirk things are, so that they're looking for that advantage so that they can take advantage of it. There is nothing which is, oh, hey, I'm going to hit something, therefore I just look at my bonus and I'm going to add +3 because I have a +3 to hit. And I'm basically, all I'm going to do is just hit things. It's like, okay, you're going to try to hit something, but how are you, when you're hitting it, going to make it better when you're hitting it rather than, basically in this particular instance, because of the fact that you're working with your particular, your character, your niche, your things. You're trying to get an advantage in this particular skill. And then basically when it comes to the actual mechanics, the mechanics are even more straightforward in terms of it is definitely meant for a system with a more experienced GM with less experienced players, because how it works is what the character is going to declare they're doing X action. They're going to break down the door. They're going to study the scene and look for clues. They're going to try to track the footprints. They're going to try to convince the guard. They're going to try to sneak in, whatever it is. And you're basically, the GM is going to listen to their explanation for basically how their character is going to do that. Um, and the GM is going to basically answer with two things. One, they're going to tell them, okay, cool, basically, yeah, that's something your character could do. And so they're going to give them they're going to give that character a die, either a D4, a D6, a D10, or a D12. And that is, those are the four, basically the four dice that this book uses. They're D20s and D100s are used for table lookups, but that's going to be apparently a thing in the bigger book, basically in the larger book, not for this quick start. But you're going to be like, oh, this isn't something I don't think your character could do. Basically, the way you explained it doesn't really fit in. You roll a D4. Or, hey, this is something that basically, yeah, completely fits in. Basically, I love the way you've explained it. It works with your character. Basically, you get to roll a D12. Basically, it makes perfect sense that your character would be really good at this. So you're going to roll a D12 instead. And then they roll that die, and then you roll a D8, which is the narrative die. Because the conceit of this game is the disc has a story it is going to tell. Things are going to happen. And the players are going to try to curve that to do their own thing. And so that D8 is how much does stuff continue in the way that it was always going to happen. It's basically a device in the book series known as narrativism. Kind of a flow of stories. So in here it's okay, do you succeed or fail? Is you roll that D8 and you get a number, and then the player rolls whatever die you assign them, and you compare the dice. If you rolled lower, doesn't happen. You get whatever the consequence is. If you roll tied, there's a balance. And if you roll over, the players succeed and they get their action to occur. The other thing you're going to tell the player at the same time you tell them what die they're going to be rolling is what type of consequence they're facing for not making it. So if it's something like, I want to jump from wagon to wagon, I'm trying to show off. Basically, I'm trying to show off. I'm just going to jump from one wagon to another wagon. Okay, cool. You're going to roll whatever die, and it's going to be a minor consequence. If you fail, you might bruise your leg. You might you'll pick up a minor trait. Basically, like maybe an inconvenience. Basically, I might give you the trait if you failed. I might give you a bruised toe. If you're trying to jump from ledge to ledge while pursuing a criminal, maybe the consequence is a little bit higher. It might go all the way up to basically inconsequential consequences are stuff like kick me side on your back is inconsequential. Basically, minor consequences are things like stubbed toe, basically just twisting ankle, things like that. Major consequences are like you basically something bad has happened. You're getting stuff like you're now wanted by the police. You're now being hunted by something. You're losing something. Basically something bad has happened. And basically it's going to have longer lasting consequences. And exceptional consequences are essentially near death stuff. And basically in terms of, you've done something you're trying to do something exceptionally basically risky. And the GM is letting you know, hey, if you fail this, bad stuff happens. And so basically the GM will let you know what those consequences are basically before you roll. So you can choose to back out of the action if you're like, no, that's not really what I'm going for here. But again, this game makes it a little bit more friendly because the player is like, the GM is like, hey, let me let you know what you're looking at here, what your consequences are. Basically, this is also, if I give you something and I say, oh, this is exceptional, it's also a chance for you to be like, oh, maybe I should dig deeper into my character and come up with a better explanation for why my character should be able to do this. The other thing, basically, when you make that roll, the GM tells you announces what the basically what the die roll was. So basically they rolled the D8 of narrativum has rolled a 6. And then the player has rolled, and you know what basically you compare. So now it's you know what's going on, you know what the consequence is, you know that they've failed, and then the GM can open it up for help from others, basically can join in and try to help, and others joining in the help will basically go through the same process. Meaning, they say, hey, I want to help, I'm going to use this trait to do that. The GM will say, that works, basically great, D12, D10, D8, not D8, D6, D4. They don't assign a consequence though, because they already know what the consequence is. Basically, it was whatever the first one is, but now it's been because someone else is trying to do it. Bumbling hands make things worse. So if you both fail at it, now the consequence goes up a level. Inconsequential become minor, minors become majors, majors become exceptional. Like basically you're trying to leap for ledge from ledge, and while normally it's just really bad if you fall down, now it's going to be really bad if two of you are trying to team up to do this, and basically things are breaking, giving way. You're falling into danger. Characters are going to possibly risk dying because both of you are trying to do this and getting in each other's way. And that's the system. That's it. It's just as simple as, hey, cool. Basically, tell me what you're doing. I'll give you a die. We'll roll dice. We'll compare them. You suffer the consequences. Move on. That is basically, it's simple, it's straightforward, and it's a great way of working with people who basically are afraid of, all this dice and numbers and math. Basically, no, just compare two numbers, you know what happens, you get the consequences, you move on. They do have one exception, which is if players propose something absolutely ridiculous. Basically, so much that basically there's no way in the world, it's 1,000,000 to 1 chance that it will come off. Basically, if the GM believes that they sincerely are trying to do something absolutely ridiculous, and they've kind of sincerely put themselves into this situation in order to change the story, which seems to be going on, basically, it automatically succeeds. Because in the Discworld, basically a famous quote from Discworld is, 1,000,000 to 1 chances happen, 1,000,000 to 1 chances happen 9 times out of 10. It's just the idea of the fact that things get silly. Basically silly things happen in the Discworld because it's a story, and because it's a story, so often it feels like things just happen. Basically, things that should never happen always seem to get pulled off or happen at just the right moments. Basically, they catch their step, they manage to avoid detection. Basically, there's no way that this could possibly work, but of course, because it's a story, it does work. And so that's the rule of 1,000,000 to 1 chances. And then there's a luck. Basically, there's essentially a luck currency, which you can represent with basically any kind of small tokens at the table, a pile of the glass beads, dice, basically like handfuls of dice. If you happen to be one of those people who may happen for some reason have 6 million dice sitting around, could be anybody. But basically pieces of candy, which works great for kids. Because it has the people at the lovely folks at Windmill Games explain that they're basically kind of younger groups. Candy is a universal game mechanic. You can why are you going out like that? Candy is a universal game mechanic. You pick up any piece of candy from one game and take it to another game and eat it there, and it'll be just as tasty. So candy is a perfectly good. It's another way of basically being a token or signifier or something like that. And all it does is it basically, luck allows you to basically get out of some consequences of a test. So you can be like, basically that feels terrible. I don't want to suffer that. Basically only one luck can be spent for test. You can tone down the consequence, or you can roll again and try to gain a success. And basically, if you want to get back luck, doing unusual, basically doing things which are unusual and interesting at the table will get luck back. And that is it's your traditional system of the GM basically should be paying attention to good play at the table, and as such should be rewarding it and being like, hey, basically that was hilarious, that was funny, that's a great twist that you put on your character. Have a luck point back. Have something that says basically that pulls out, that points at you and basically draws attention to that good play and being like, yes, I want more of that. Please do more of that. Which is the whole point of those hero points in Pathfinder, inspiration in D&D, and a lot of those systems that have that is the fact that it is basically reinforcing good behavior, encourages good behavior. It is basically one of the best ways of basically making people respond better to what is known as positive reinforcement, much more than they do to basically negative punishment or things like that. I'm taking something away from you because you did something bad. Things like I'm forcing something on you because you did something bad, or things like that. Things basically people generally tend to respond best to, hey, you've done something, you get something for it. Oh, hey, I want to get more of those things which you've given me because I like getting stuff. Especially if you pick something like basically the luck mechanic in this, basically, oh, it's cool, I have this luck thing, that's a good thing to have. Or if when you're handing out things like candy and things like that at the table, it's also, oh, cool, these are fun little things to collect. We love collecting candy and other stuff. It's just natural hoarding instincts and just fun things like that. So basically, it's a great mechanic. Basically, encouraging you to keep moving, keep going. Basically point out something that happened and being like, more of that. And encouraging it without you stopping the game and pointing at a player and being like, all of you, I want you to do more like what this person did. It works. It works better when you do it a little bit more subtly. Now you want a Tootsie Roll for some reason. Well, basically, I've got like M&M's leftover Halloween candy. This could work as well. But in this case, so all of that to say, basically, it's a really simple and straightforward system, which means that it's easy to sit down at the table and be like, hey guys, let's do a role-playing game. And basically, especially for if you're dealing with younger players and things like that, or people who are kind of scared of role-playing or basically in terms like that because they've heard about it, but they're like, oh, I would love to do that, but I don't have a head for numbers or things like that. This is a much more direct, basically, like there was a clip that went around on the internet a little bit ago, where basically someone was like, basically, how do you basically talking to somebody else about, basically someone was like, how, no, I've never played D&D or something like that, and they're like, hey, do you want to play D&D right here? We could do it right here. And the person's like, what do you mean? And it was like, well, we could just basically they just start being like, oh, you're a hunter, you're in the woods. Okay, basically you hear something, basically you're walking through the woods, you're going through, and you hear something off in the distance. Yeah, John Bernthal, and I can't remember who the basically it was an excellent it was basically an excellent female GM, whose name I have forgotten. I'm terrible with names, and especially names of celebrities. But in any case, basically, she's just like, hey, what are you thinking of? Basically, like, oh, what do you think? How do you want to deal with the fact you just heard a noise? He's like, okay. He starts asking questions back. And she's like, okay. Now, normally, basically, you'd start asking questions. I might have you make a roll. Let's just say that you make this roll and you roll high. Oh, okay. So now you know where Deborah Ann Wool. Okay, there you go. And like, okay, now you start basically, okay, you figure out where the noise is coming from, what do you want to do? And they start having that back and forth storytelling conversation, which is what role-playing is. And it's really easy to just start getting into, that flow of a back and forth storytelling conversation, because people love telling stories and participating in stories, and it's a universal language. Everybody's done it before. Everyone has an imagination and they can use it. And kids love it basically from that perspective. If you're just engaging with kids do it all the time, where you'll start they'll come up with these wild stories, and this is just, hey, I'm gonna put a little bit of a framework around this story for you, and then we're gonna drive it forward and see where it goes. And we add the dice roll in to make silly things happen or wild things happen, or to introduce failure into it, so that you're forced to react to that, change plans, do other things, so that it's not just you just saying, oh, basically whatever the problem is, I fix it. The dice basically force you to problem solve, think about things, deal with failure, deal with success. Oh, hey, I actually succeeded at that. Now what do I do? And basically, it's really easy with this guy. I was playing with my nieces and nephews, and basically they grabbed a D20 and they were like, "Oh, hey, basically, we want to do D&D, Uncle Mark. We want to do D&D." And it's like, okay. Basically, just start talking through a story. Basically, start telling me about your characters. What are their goals? What do they want to do? And then basically, like, oh, we want to do this. Okay, basically. So let's say you're going to basically want to do that. So roll the d20 and see how successful you are. Oh, I rolled high. Great. You're able to get a success on that. And so now you're moved forward with the story there. Oh, you rolled low. Okay, you suffered a setback. Basically, how do you want to change your approach, change your story? How do you keep things moving, basically, and you want to keep accomplishing it? Oh, okay, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to deal with that. And this system lets you do that, but rather than being like, okay, sit down and look at these numbers and things like that when you roll a die, it's simple comparison stuff that lets you just keep moving and keep going. And that is basically that's the heart of role playing. That's the heart of basically it's just having that. Basically, I often refer to it as it is improv with dice. Basically, that lets you that gives you guidance and direction on what's going on. The more dice and more numbers you throw into it, you're shifting it out of improv and more into it's more of basically a pure game. The less influence dice have it, the more improv it starts shifting into. But it's kind of at its heart, it's still narrative storytelling with dice. And so this system is basically they're really working on with the system of, hey, let's break that down to as simple a level as possible, so that you can get people involved in this. And it being in Discworld gives people, a lot of people read those books, a lot of people love those books, and putting it into Discworld, allows you to make it silly, allows you to say yes more often, which is great, because sometimes the hardest thing of getting people interested and involved is when you have to keep telling them no. Okay, yes, you're a ranger character, but you didn't take the nature step. You had to choose between nature and investigation and survival, and you took natural and you didn't take survival, so you're not good at tracking. So sorry, you may have had this picture in your head of this character as this awesome kind of woodsman, but they're not quite. And this system is like, oh, you wrote down the fact that your character was a woodsman, and you're like, oh, I think because I'm a woodsman, I should be able to find game trails in the wood. They're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Basically, you would be able to do that. Basically, it totally makes sense as protection. Here's a D12. Okay, it makes some sense, but it has been raining, and basically there's some complications to deal with this, and so maybe you're good at it, but basically you've got some complications. Here's a D10. Or yes, but basically, yes, you're a good ranger in the wood, basically a woodsman and a tracker, but you're in the middle of an urban environment. So you've got some advantage, but not a lot. Here's a D6. Or that doesn't your ability to hunt, your ability to be a woodsman really isn't going to help you convince anybody, convince people that this jewel that you're holding is authentic. Okay. So basically saying yes more often means that you're going to get more people more involved, more interested, and basically just the sheer silliness and the whack, and basically ensure basically the ability, basically everybody is taking it very seriously, but while silly things keep happening. Great, basically that's going to keep people focused and in, but gives plenty of opportunities for people for laughter, for joking, for things like that. So that you're not getting bogged down in it's a very serious moment that is going on here, which is good for first time plays. So I've said a lot about basically all of that, but in terms of lore link and how lore link fits into all of that, basically, the first thing that obviously is great, is going to help you with lore link is basically, once I record all of this kind of stuff in the campaign into lore link, basically I'm going to have a good broken down version of this adventure. Like, the adventure itself isn't ridiculously complex, but it starts on page 21 and then goes all the way to page 39. So 18 pages with images and other stuff, locations and basically things, and basically things that happen in different locations and things that link back, etc., etc. So basically, great thing. Basically, you've got a bunch of different locations which are called out up here at the beginning of this. Like right here, it gives you this location map right here. So like, oh, that is the map of how, basically, what the city looks like. And so you're like, great, now I have this map of where basically what we're looking for here, along with basically locations and things like that. And basically they're not because the page numbers are hyperlinked. So basically you can click back, but once you're here, you can't really get quickly, basically you can get the link to other things back and forth, but if your players jump back to something back earlier that isn't in here, you're forced to flip back, find that new page, etc. And that's slowing things down, basically going to be slowing things down to the table. And what you want is basically, you're not basically, especially at holiday parties or things like that, basically having something that you can have on your phone, basically because LoreLink is just a website. Whoop. I can have all these just set up on my, basically I can have all of this. I can pull out Ankh-Morpork, and I can have notes. I can put all the descriptions in here that I need to. I can basically save that. Then I can add. Basically, I can add in the sub-locations that we just showed and talked about. All of those can get added in here really quickly. Like I can have this Ethan's boarding house. I can add in Nobblers and Sons. Stone on Stone. I can add all these locations. Just basically, I can build this out ahead of time. And so I can have all these locations. I know how they link together. I could say, okay, Myth Ethan's boarding house. That's associated. Basically, it's next to these two locations. So it's next to Nobblers and Sons. And it's next to Stone on Stone. So I can bounce easily between them, just basically going through between all of them, not having to, basically I don't have to refer back to, basically if I'm looking at a location, I can tell, okay, they're like, oh, what's near here? And you can be like, oh, you're near Miss Ethan's boarding house, and you're also near the bridge, you're also near Nobblers and Sons. Done. I've got all of that, basically. I've got all that information in one place. I'm not having to skip back to another page. I'm looking at it right here, keeping things going in a moment. And again, basically, if I have all that, I can get this all set up and I can have it all done and recorded basically on my phone. And I can pull it up and set it down at the table and run the adventure from that, as opposed to trying to run it through a PDF that I'm squinting at and reading on my phone. Basically, I've got lore link up, and I could just use that and basically just flip through it just like that. And basically, it'll make it for a much better basically kind of environment, basically, because you're just sitting down at the table, you pull your phone out and you've got it. You can pull it out anywhere. Basically quick start to an adventure, just play through it. You don't have to basically spend a bunch of time prepping stuff, reading stuff, flipping through things, reminding you of stuff, where stuff is, what's connected to what, who characters are, etc., etc. All of that linking and lore that you can set up ahead of time in LoreLink means the fact that you can get deal with it ahead of time, just right there on your phone, and that lowers that bar to entry just a little bit for, oh hey, I don't want to have to bring basically a whole clunk of basically a whole bunch of stuff, basically heavy books, print this adventure out, or bring a laptop and set it down. No, basically you're just sitting down at the table with your friends and or family, and just playing the game. You get it. Basically, you will have to have a set of dice, but basically if you're a forever GM, you probably have at least one, if not two, sets of dice on your persons or nearby, basically at any point. And also, there are 600 ways of rolling dice on your phone. You even can get really nice, pretty looking dice to roll on your phone as well. Basically, I think 3D DDD dice. It's a DDD dice, I believe it is. Is one of those. LoreLink has talked about. They're a great site for basically giving you all sorts of interesting dice that you can save. And I've never been a GM, but I always have one set of dice next to me, right door next to me. Yep. And basically, dice are relatively easy to come by. And basically, you only need one set for the table, really, because the only die the DM ever uses in basically the Quickstart, at least, is the D8. That's all you need. If you end up with the full book, it sounds like you'll probably want the D20 and the D100 if you're rolling random events or random things. Yeah, you can roll dice in the Google web browser. And so you take the D8 out, and you're like, cool, this is my die. Basically, you set it in front of you, and basically then you point to the rest of it. Like, and these are basically you take the D20 and the two D10s out, you set them aside, and you point to the rest of the dice, and you're like, here you go. Basically, I'm going to tell you to pick up one of these dice. You're going to roll it, and you're going to give me basically tell me what the number is. I'm going to roll a D8. You're going to see what that number is that I rolled, and then we'll know exactly what happened. And you can keep moving at that point. And again, basically, so now you're reducing the amount, excuse me, the amount of setup, amount of time, which that's kind of key for these sort of things, especially if you're dealing with kids. And basically, again, when I say kids, I don't mean like 4-year-olds. I mean, you can role play with 4-year-olds. I have some fun, basically a fun little mini book that basically is a drawing dinosaur game, which is just you telling silly stories about stuff that you draw with crayons, and you're drawing with your eyes closed. But this is the level above that where you're introducing dice. You have basically, it's giving the identification of that's a D4, that's a D6, that's a D10, that's a D. Basically, this is a D8, that's a D10, that's a D12. And so. You've got all of that right. Basically, you've got all of that right there, and basically, give you easy identification. You tell them I want a D4. They associate by the end of the night. They know what a D4 is because it's the pyramid one. You pointed that out. But again, you want to kind of get things moving as quickly as possible. No one wants to stop and be like, okay, hang on, let me look stuff up. Let me find stuff. Basically, as soon as you start doing that, especially at a holiday party, even without kids, the longer time you spend looking up things, the more often that the people who are basically aren't as avid role players are going to kind of start to check out. Because they're not used to the idea of the fact that the GM has to flip through books, look up rules, find things. Because they're not attached to it. And so if you start to do that, they're going to start to draw back out. They're going to start to pull their phones out, check things, talk to people, go refill things, etc., etc. Basically Lorelink will help you keep things snappier. Basically keep things moving, keep things interesting, etc., etc. The other thing, basically, that's going to be great with Lorelink, is once you have things in here, you can leave yourself notes over how things are working. Basically, if this is something that you're pulling out to basically get multiple parties, multiple groups of friends. Um, you're like, hey, let's do this. Basically, things like that. Basically, Thanksgiving, holiday parties, coworkers, whatever it is. You're adding notes to it, being like, hey, this group did this silly thing. Basically, like, we should have a shoe brownie that keeps complaining about working conditions. So basically, something that was hilarious that you added in at one point, basically in the past. And you're like, oh, that was great. I should add that to things, basically add that going forward. Make a note of it. And now, basically, the next time you pull that out, the next time you run that for a different group of people, you've got that note to be like, oh, I should add that. I should add that in there. I should carry this in here. I create, basically, this is the accent I've given that character last time I ran this one shot. I should have that again. I should keep that. And if it turns out basically you get basically partway through the one shot and you don't record, basically you don't get everything done that you wanted to get done. Sessions are great for recording things, for this is what happened, these are the events that happened, these are the things they looked at, these are the things that they were happy, they're interested in. Excuse me. These are basically, and so if we pick back, if they want to pick this back up later, because a couple hours happen and kids have to go to bed, or party starts breaking up, but people are like, oh, we really want to do this again, basically, let's keep continuing this. Or they want to continue this, basically with the same characters in a further adventure that you need to come up with now. You've got the notes, you've got the session, things like that, recorded in Lorelink, and now you can expand it into a more full campaign without having to be like, oh gosh, what did I do? What did I record? And again, you can jot down notes relatively quickly on a cell phone, basically do it just quickly, and basically adding things as notes. You're just dealing with drop downs, things like that. One second. But basically, so again, it's the idea of the fact that for a holiday party type setting, a lot of the key is going to be over basically keeping things smooth, keeping things running, and basically keeping things light, and so that's kind of basically, but in general, running a more satirical, a more funny, silly event. Basically, I was talking about this a little bit earlier, like in terms of what do I use Lorelink with, what don't I use Lorelink with, and basically there's like, sometimes things get so silly and ridiculous and things like that, that keeping track of things and keeping notes becomes a little bit less useful, and so I may be less likely to use Lorelink for those type of events. But basically that's where basically when things are leading a little bit away from, okay, this is just straight role playing and this is more wacky comedy improv with dice, obviously recording and structure and things like that don't work as well in those situations. But those are more the exception than the rule. In general, when you're running, basically, if you're running a game that you're running a game that you want people to engage in, that you're telling a story in, that you're building something on, you're going to want to keep track of their suggestions, their input into it. what they're building onto it so that you can in turn build on top of that and add it to whatever story you're telling, and keeping track of that and keeping things narratively, somewhat narratively consistent. Obviously, if you have a character whose accent who changes every time they visit them because you forgot to write down what their accent was, that's just funny. That work basically, that's less jarring in a comedy situation than it is in a serious campaign. Um, but one second. But in basically a lot of what you're going to basically the interesting thing with basically Morpork and things like that is you're not going to be running a dungeon diving adventure. Those don't work as well for satire type situations. Like you're just like, there's a gem at the bottom of this dungeon, and here is a 16 maps and hallways and things like that that you're going to go wander down and through. Um, that's not really interesting for a satirical type situation. It's not risky. Like you could do that, but you're going to basically even in that situation, you're going to want to build points of interest in there. It's not going to be generic orcs they're running into. It's going to be you're going to want to use lore link. Basically, you're going to want to call out basically unique types of orcs that you've come up with. So you're like, oh hey, so I'm going to throw them into the dungeon. It's going to be kind of completely random. I'm not going to really create a map and things like that. I'm not going to have rooms built ahead of time. But you're going to be like, oh hey, I want to come up with some kind of satirical to basically like the grumpy orc guards, basically things like that. And I want to basically describe what these grumpy orcs are in my satirical world, what they look like. I want to build out their characters. Like okay, they're they're unionized. But this group hasn't heard from their local union rep in the last 10 years, but they aren't certain. They aren't certain of their still getting paid. And then you're like, oh hey, basically, let's work on that union rep. Basically, like, oh hey. Basically, I could either have like the union rep by the dragon in room A2 while trying to basically they'll try to negotiate a moving gold. Basically. So, cool. Now I've got them. Basically, I built them out. I've got this idea of, hey, at some point they're going to counter these orc guards. Here's their idea. Here's the idea I had for them, and now I can throw them out there, and get them ready. Again, this is coming from the idea of the fact that if you're wanting to have something that you can just pull out at some point and play, that you're not planning it for a campaign, you're kind of planning a one shot that can happen at some point, basically whether in Ankh-Morpork or whether basically using Discworld in particular. Basically a lot of the fun and basically the creativity and things like that is going to come from you creating interesting places, interesting characters, interesting events that are going around. You're more likely also to be you're probably creating you're probably like a mystery or an adventure or something like that is what you're going for. Mystery or an adventure is more like what you're going for rather than a dungeon crawl, rather than a dragon is terrorized. Basically, like you may be having a dragon terrorizing a town, but now you're going to want to give the dragon a character and a reason why they're doing it, and what the townspeople and what's really going on and things like that. Because it's not a combat system. The answer isn't, oh, okay, we go out, we march through the caves until we find the dragon, then we punch the dragon. You basically punch the dragon in the face until he stops being a problem. Then we come back to town and are celebrated as heroes. We need to figure out what's going on with the dragon, basically negotiate with the dragon, bargain with the dragon. We need to trick the dragon. Um, so basically, you either have that kind of thing, or it's a mystery, it's a system, so when you're planning out these adventures, basically, you're going to want to create these situations so that your players can stumble into them and make them wild and wacky and silly and basically mess them up and invert them and turn them upside down. And then you have other things which are going on, basically, that you've already kind of planned out inside of LoreLink. And so I'm not going to be doing a lot of work with probably linking locations to locations and things like that. I may be mapping them out for the case of the mystery that's in the Quickstart, but I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of trying to think of the best way to describe this. I'm doing a lot of surface level traits. I'm not going into deep backstories. I'm not going to write like the grumpy orc guards we just talked about here. I'm not going to go into the deep backstory of why there are orc guards in this dungeon, why they would even exist here, how they would even get here, how could they have survived this long being down here, what's going on. I'm going with I've got a silly idea. I want to get that silly idea out there, link it to the other silly ideas I have floating around, and then let the players bounce off of all of them. And if they start to question, hey, why is this here? How does this work? You encourage them. You push them into them. Basically, you help them find those. Basically, you help them find those holes in your plot holes with them, and you encourage them to break them. You encourage them to kind of basically tear them apart and rebuild them in their own ideas. They add their own stuff to what's going on, so that the end result may not be anything close to the story you were originally thinking, but it's something that you and they have built together. And if you're recording that with LoreLink, now you have that story written down. You have it kind of organized and neat, and basically you can then present that new kind of weirdly modified world to the next group and see what they do to it. Basically, see how they build on it, see how they change it, how they twist it, and then give next group and next group and next group, and just have fun basically with this ever living campaign. Basically, just silly little adventure that keeps changing every time more people interact with it. So even when you come back to that same group maybe a year later, it's a completely weirder, different story that they're like, wait, this was nothing like what we did before, but I recognize those parts of it. It could be fun. So basically, and LoreLink is great for helping to record those things and building kind of a living record of what's going on, rather than just being a sketchpad for your story. Which is basically how you would normally approach a long-lasting campaign. Is okay, here are the things. Basically, I'm writing out a full arc. I've got events and timelines and places. Oh, hey, and things like that. You're building it all out with LoreLink to come up with this grand epic adventure and all the pieces and how things interact, and then you turn your players loose in that world, and you basically let them interact with it. Instead, you're building a living, silly thing that twitches and morphs and changes, and you've thrown down ideas. You've used it as more of a notepad of, here's some silly things I think could happen. Here are some silly interactions. Here are the things which are tying things together. And then you let your players loose in it, and you're letting them kind of wreck things and change them up and basically trash them and rebuild them and creating something new and different and interesting. That really works. That sells the point of this being a story which is being told and that is supposed to go in direction X, but the players are there to make it go in a different direction, which is what the Discworld system is kind of about. Is basically, there is a normal serious story which is supposed to be happening here, and then your players get involved and it takes an abrupt left turn. And suddenly now they're basically, now the story is trying to force its way back in, and that's what that narrative die is basically, no, this is the way things are supposed to go, stop interfering. And that's kind of basically like, so basically that's what you've got, basically that could be what you've got recorded as lore link, is that original story, and then you're recording all the silly things that your characters are breaking it off and trying to adjust it. And that's good if you're doing a longer term thing, then you're coming back to this and being like, oh, okay, I see what they did here. How can things get back on track? Is what basically, and that's what the players are going to have to continue fighting. Is figuring out, oh, basically, nope, it's right. Basically, this person's basically like doing, oh, they keep catching this guy or almost catching this guy, but he keep basically the world keeps trying to get him, so he gets his last second getaway. And he basically, how is the system adjusting to letting those things happen? What's the weird planned thing that can happen that will change the story up? And so that's something else. Basically, that's something else you could do if you're that basically again, that is more of a basically if you're approaching this from the standpoint of, I want this to be more organized improv with dice, less than I want to tell the story necessarily that's in the Quickstart guide. But basically, like if you're wanting to take what's in the Quickstart guide, you're wanting to break things down. You're wanting to take the organization they have in there. They've got clues and things like that in different locations. And again, the whole point of that is you're organizing all of those things and you're having them quickly available to you. So that you can react to whatever is going on. This is great, especially if you're the type of GM who's like, a lot of times if your players throw a curveball at you, you're like, oh, I really want to play this Discworld thing. I want to do something silly. I want to do something a little bit more creative and a little bit less locked into a lane as D&D or Pathfinder or something like that. I'm wanting to stretch myself as a GM. Cool. Basically, using LoreLink to record all of the things that are supposed to be happening, all of the ideas and suggestion that the Quickstart is going to give you, is going to let you flex yourself a little bit more because you have a safety net. It gives you that safety net of, here are the clues which are supposed to be in this area. Here's how the things connect together. Here's the story. And you've got it in front of you. You've got it in your notes in LoreLink. And so you can pull together like, okay, here's the location. I've got this. Basically, I've got what's supposed to happen in this area, what the players are supposed to find. So if the players throw something at me, I know maybe what is supposed to happen. Here are the clues that will lead them to the next thing. I want to reward them for what they're doing. I want to reward the players for the ridiculous, silly idea that they had. Oh, okay, cool. I've got this set of clues here which are built-in rewards. So that gives me a starting point for where I want to, how I can reward the players silly. Basically, if they go into a situation and they start interrogating the rats in the area because one of the characters basically is their background is street rat. And they're like, hey, because of that, I have a good rapport with the actual rats of the city. Because again, basically the Discworld adventure is about taking those traits and twisting them into silly and new and different things. They're like, I've got a good location, basically a good rapport with the rats, and there are actually intelligent rats in the city. Because of a weird alchemical disaster, because the Alchemist Guild is always constantly doing things. And as such, I can talk to these rats and I can get the information from them. That probably isn't covered in the book, but you've got a list of clues that basically the adventure has a whole bunch of clues already broken down in them. I can record that in LoreLink, and now I've got that safety net of, oh, okay, I know what's supposed to be going on here. I know what the description basically is. I'll record those clues in the description. I'll write down those basically I'll give them that. Basically, I'll give them a clue that it's supposed to be in the area. They'll point something out. I'm not stuck without a reward. Basically, I'm not stuck with basically I'm not without a reward for that player's ingenuity. I have something to give them. I have something to encourage them to keep going, keep doing the silly things, keep basically twisting their traits into new and different things, and then I can record that in the notes. I can add a quick note, be like, basically like, Urchin can talk with the city. Cool. I've got that note. Basically, I can write that there. I can then record it on their actual character, on their player. If I basically it just becomes a multi thing, or if I'm just coming back. If I'm coming back, I'm like, how did they solve this thing? Oh, okay, that's how they did. They got past it because Urchin could do this. Okay, great. Maybe I'll basically like, okay, now I've got these intelligent rats running around. I need to remember I've got them. Let's see if I can't spell. And then I can give them characters, I can give them names, so I remember the fact that I've named this rat Bluto and this rat basically Atui, things like that. So it's rat Atui, etc. Jokes for it themselves. And you go from there, and basically I don't have to remember, oh, what did I name that rat again? What was the leader of the rat's name? Cool. And if I come up with something like, I'm like, oh gosh, how am I going to deal with the doing this without them just completely breaking the adventure later on, because oh gosh, they could just figure out everything. Maybe I'll throw whatever basically a quick basically I happen to be thinking about something while they're on break or something like that. Basically, or we're at a break between sessions. I could throw something into the description here to remind myself later, hey, basically there's the intelligent cats in the city which are working for the bad guy. There's the there's a run on cheese or something like that, and so basically the rats won't work unless they get paid, etc., etc. And you can write that note down, keep track of that, keep things moving, and basically reward the player for what they did, but be able to basically keep track of, oh, okay, I've got this new piece I need to work into the story. So in terms of basically figuring this all out, getting it all settled in, basically things like that, recording player information, things like that. And last, of course, basically the new feature we had just talked about. We just talked about we recently released if you watched some of the previous streams, we now have player sharing built into Lore Link. So if you create this campaign on your and you have it available, you can share that campaign with players. And so if you sit down to do a one shot, you can share things like, okay, here you go, guys. Basically, I'm going to share you the link to the campaign. And this is the way that you can keep track of what's going on. You can I'll reveal character names, and you can make notes, and you can look at things. And so if you're someone who is basically brand new to it, they're like, oh, there's so much going on. I don't want to have to remember all of it. What was the name of that location again? What are we trying to do here? What just happened? What did that person just say to us? Etc. Etc. Cool. With player sharing, you can share bits and pieces of the campaign as you encounter them, and the players can pull it up on this. You send them an invite; they can pull it up on their phone right there at the table, and they'll be like, "Oh, okay, cool. I don't have to remember. Captain Vimes. It's the head of the Night Watch. I can just look at my phone and be like, oh, the Night Watch guy, and they look up. They look at the. They look up the character list and they're like, oh yeah, Captain Vimes. His name's right there, and I've got that already pulled up and ready to go. I don't have to stop the game and ask for information, things like that, while I'm contemplating what I'm doing while someone else is doing something. All of that to kind of say, as we start to kind of wrap it up here, since we're coming down to the last 10 minutes of the stream. Basically role-playing, stuff like Discworld, Tune, and Feng Shui, which are two of the other games, again, that I've talked about, in the past. are great ways of bringing basically role playing to a group of people who would normally be terrified of role playing or are uncertain what role playing is or unfamiliar with it or just basically they really wanted to because they're young, they're teenagers or something like that. It's a great way of basically being like, yeah, we could get a quick little adventure in. It's going to be, and the best part about this stuff like basically Tune and Discworld and Feng Shui and things like that is because it is so much built around big, epic, silly, wacky moments, things happening where the players get absolutely rewarded for taking the situation and twisting it and breaking it and things like that. Those type of situations happen more often in the satirical one-shot type of games because wacky over-the-top things happen and those things are more memorable. Like basically like I can recall a lot of the wacky silly things which have happened in my Toon games more than I can remember basically more standard basically directional basically very epic long campaigns because I can remember individual moments from that campaign but I am basically, but the over the top silly stuff with a situation where you figured out something and you twisted the rules and you broke the game and basically everybody just broke down laughing because you turned Strawn into this silly little person who basically was following you around as a lovesick puppy because of the way you basically managed to do things. That's a memorable moment. People are going to talk about that. Kids are basically, especially if you're involving kids and things like that, you're getting them involved. That gets them much more hype and much more interested because that's something cool and memorable and silly that sticks out in their head that they're more likely to remember than that time they walked around a dungeon and a maze for 20 minutes and basically well they basically started to get towards the bottom of finding the dragon and things like that and that was the end of the session where basically they raided the castle and they fought some stuff, and maybe they have an epic moment, or maybe they don't because the dice weren't behaving correctly, and so they don't really get that fun moment. Basically doing one shots of these funny, silly, satirical type system help condense that all in, and it's going to give them an experience that they're going to want to come back to. They're going to want to explore, maybe not quite in that same level of frantic energy, but hey, let's spread that out. Let's do a slower build to get into those epic moments and bigger payoffs. Because like the one shot moments basically, yeah, it's a big epic silly moment. It's not going to have as deep of an impact as we finally after 20 sessions of the game we located the big bad. We broke into their castle after basically planning this assault for weeks. We broke in, we confronted them. He gave his big bad villain speech, and we had an epic fight where characters were dying and back and forth and things like that. Basically, that's a much higher high than you're probably going to get from a silly Toon Discworld type game. But it also takes a lot more effort. You need a lot more buy-in from people to reach that point, as opposed to, hey, I need a little bit less buy-in from you. Honey Heist is another example that just came to mind. I need a little bit less buy-in, but I'm going to give you some really fun, wacky stuff you're going to remember. I'm going to give you those fun moments that basically you can take back and be like, oh yeah, basically, wasn't it great when? Oh, it was fun with, basically share with their friends, share with those, and then come back to you later and be like, hey, can we do that again? Basically, that was fun. That was a good experience. I enjoyed doing that. And basically, so it's a fun way. It's fun something that if you record in the floor link and you have it in your pocket, it's something you can pull out at basically something when you're staying over the holidays, over things, and you're tired of watching the 20-second Hallmark movie that got pulled up on the TV. You can suggest something else. What if we play our own Hallmark movie? But we'll set it in a wacky fantasy city where orcs and where trolls and dwarves and things like that hang around. What if we did a rom-com in that situation? Oh, okay, sure. That sounds weird. What are you talking about? Well, hey, let me introduce you. Basically, we'll do a little bit of role playing. So, and basically, you've got an easy in. You start it basically, you build it out, and you just play and you have a good time. So, it's now 6:25. So basically, all of that to say, basically, yes, you can do role playing over the holidays with friends and family. No, you don't have to have a stack of books yay deep, and basically 16 sets of dice, and a GM screen and things like that you take around with you. Basically, you can prep something relatively light, relatively easy, basically in LoreLink, and have that set up and ready to go. And systems like Discworld are a great way of looking at that, and building those out, basically things like that. So where am I going? Basically, so if you're interested in LoreLink and you're like, hey, that sounds interesting, I'd love to have basically, I'd love to check into that for the holidays and maybe build something relatively low key. Cool, great news. LoreLink is basically there is a trial free level of LoreLink which is available right now that you can sign up for, basically this very evening, as it were. And you can get all of those things I've been talking about, with the exception of player sharing. That's currently only for our paid members currently. And basically our paid members right now consist of our Kickstarter backers, and we're working on fulfilling everything to our Kickstarter backers, and then we're going to eventually release everything to we're going to make payment systems available to everybody so people can actually give us money. What a great idea. But basically that free link that just got posted in the chat right there, you can go check that out, sign up for an account, basically, and you create a couple of campaigns in LoreLink today. And if you're like, hey, that sounds great, that sounds awesome, basically, but I'm interested in, basically, I'm curious about this Discworld thing. I want to dig more into it. I want to see basically more about the campaign and planning and things like that. Great. Basically, number one thing I've got to mention is that we're going to be playing Discworld sometime before the end of the year. Right now, tentatively, initially we had it planned for next weekend. We were going to next Friday, rather. We were going to be playing LoreLink. However, scheduling conflicts have occurred. Oh no, the bane of basically one thing that LoreLink cannot stop is people's schedules changing and schedule conflicts. Basically, the software is awesome, but I can't fix that. Sorry. So much like that, we had a date, then schedules changed. People have more important things come up. And so we're having to reschedule that. Currently, we're looking at rescheduling that to December 6th. So that is a Friday. We will be doing the actual play on December 6th. So if you're interested in, basically, want to keep track of what's going on, when we're going live, when we're doing stuff, are we keeping our schedules shifting and changing, and basically weird things may be happening at times you may not have expected, best way to keep track of that is that follow button right here on Twitch. That follow button on Twitch will let you know when we go live. I fill out a little box and it sends you a little message saying, hey, that channel you thought was cool that time, they've gone live with something interesting. And basically you can come check us out and see what we're streaming, and that's what that cool follow button does. Plus basically algorithm and numbers and follows and things like that help with that, just the same as that subscribe button basically helps let us know, oh hey, you're doing something interesting, and basically things like that. And that subscribe button here on Twitch basically also gives us a little bit of, you're like, hey, thanks for here's a little bit of monetary thanks for what you're doing. Basically, also, you can use if you happen to be an Amazon Prime member and you enjoy the idea of taking money out of Jeff Bezos' pocket, you can use if you have an Amazon Prime account, you can connect your Twitch account to it, and you can give us a free sub. Doesn't cost you anything and supports us. It's great. Over on the YouTube side, basically, if you caught part of this and you're interested in other things that we've done, you're like, hey, I want to see what you've done in the past. I'm interested in, you talked about Toon, you talked about Feng Shui. Our YouTube channel has all that stuff archived. So you can go over to YouTube, and check out our past videos there. And over there, if you want to encourage us over on YouTube and help fight the algorithm, you can basically subscribe to our channel over there, which will give you those same alerts. And it's free on YouTube because 2 words meaning 2 different things on 2 different platforms. It's not confusing. You can like our videos over there. You can leave comments and basically think like, oh, this was cool, this is fun, I enjoyed watching this. all those things you can do over on the YouTube side to basically encourage us, and you can also as well basically check out our past videos and get more information about LoreLink and more different ways, see the different ways you can use LoreLink and different systems we've talked about using with LoreLink. If you basically also, if you want to keep it up to date on schedule changes and things like that, what we're doing, or interact with cool people who are also doing TTRPG things, and you're like, hey, I want to basically I want to talk to other people about cool TTRPG ideas and things that have happened, and see some cool other stuff that's happening in the TTRPG space. Check out our Blue Sky account and our Facebook account. And both of those basically can be found on social media. They get updated. They'll let you know when streams are going live. They'll also basically give you cool interactions with other people in terms of, oh, hey, these fun things are happening. Basically, what's some interesting situations basically are going on. Basically, other players have encountered wacky, funny, silly stuff they've done, how they've got around how they've dealt with players. Posing interesting questions. And if you're like, hey, I don't want to deal with social media because there's enough things on fire and social media is kind of one of them, that's understandable. That's what we have our newsletter for. A newsletter summarizes all the things I've kind of talked about, upcoming dev stuff, upcoming streams, past streams, cool things we're doing, etc., conventions we're going to. All of that stuff can be found in a newsletter, and it just gets delivered directly to your inbox, and you don't have to interact with anybody else. Just read your email, and there it is. It's all right there. And it comes once a month. We don't spam you with random stuff on that. We're busy enough with other stuff, so it's just there once a month. And basically check out basically free stuff. Check out we have other examples, things like that. Yep, I think that covers all of it. So basically, we will be back next week, most likely with me covering planning of basically going into more of the planning of this adventure that I've talked about, rather than talking in more generic terms about how to, basically about holidays and family stuff. I'll be focusing probably more in actually planning the Up in Smoke adventure. That is what's currently scheduled. That might change. If so, you've got all those places you could check that out and find out more information about it. But until then, thank you for watching. Thank you for stopping by, and we will catch you next time.